The House Rules Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Schutte?
Here.
Representatives Aragona?
Here.
Wenzel? Here. Martin? Posthumus?
Here.
DeBoer?
Here.
Whitwer? Here. Liberati?
Here.
Herzberg?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative DeBoer moves to adopt the minutes of the May 22nd meeting. There being no objections, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. First, we will be taking up House Bill 4246. Representative Aragona moves to report the bill with recommendation. Would the clerk please call the roll?
On the motion to report, Chair Schutte?
Yes.
Representatives Aragona?
Yes.
Wenzel?
Yes.
Martin? Posthumus?
Yes.
DeBoer?
Yes.
Whitwer?
No.
Liberati?
No.
Herzberg?
No.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 yeas, 3 nays, and 0 passed. The motion does prevail.
The bill is reported with recommendation. We will now be hearing testimony on House Bill 4391. We have Representative Rogers and Bagol testifying. Representatives, please welcome forward and begin when you're ready.
Good morning, Chair Schutte and other distinguished members of the Rules Committee. I'm here today with my colleague from the 41st District, Representative Julie Rogers, to speak to you about our bill package that will help improve roadway safety, reduce serious injury accidents, and save lives here in our state by allowing police officers to use preliminary oral fluid roadside screening to help determine if the driver of motor vehicle is operating under the influence. In 2016, Michigan lawmakers adopted the Barbara and Thomas J. Swift Law, which instructed Michigan police to create a roadside drug testing pilot program. That pilot program, which occurred in a 3-year period across 69 counties, resulted in Michigan becoming the first state in the nation to use oral fluid testing on the roadside to better detect those operating under the influence of drugs. Since that time, numerous states have used Michigan's oral fluid framework and studies to guide them in making their own statutory changes to their DUI laws. Currently, 32 other states now use oral fluid to detect impaired drivers. Rather alarming is the fact that of the 1,201 fatal crashes that occurred in Michigan in 2023, 230 of them, which is nearly 25% of all deaths that occurred on our roadways, were drug-related. It's time we reclaim our leadership and strengthen our efforts to keep our roads safe, and I'm asking for your support in this bill. As a law enforcement officer with 32 years experience, sometimes I take for granted that people understand what happens behind the scenes when an officer is doing an investigation into impaired driving, and I'd like to take a few minutes to bring some of that things to light. So I have here today with me the Sotoxa machine that we are pushing the bill to put in the hands of police officers on our roadside. When a police officer is on patrol, he doesn't just randomly stop people. He or she's a violation. He observes some driving, but he develops probable cause in order to stop, either somebody who's violating our laws or he suspects is violating our laws. And I want to kind of walk you through what happens on that traffic stop when you're investigating an impaired driver. So again, the stop is primarily based maybe on some observation. Somebody's crossing the line. They're doing some type of erratic driving. And an officer sees that, stops them, and then makes contact with the driver. And they're looking for signs of impairment. And if they detect something, whether it's observations, maybe how your eyes are, maybe there's a smell of alcohol, who knows what it is, those drivers at some point in time could be asked to step from the car and perform some sobriety tests. And there's a reason that is done. Those are done voluntarily, but again, the officer's trying to determine if his suspicions are right. And sometimes those tests are taken, an officer is satisfied, and the people go on their way. If further investigation is necessary, depending on what they suspect, they may offer them a PBT, a preliminary breath test, and most of us should be familiar with that. Those have been in the hands of a police officer for about 50 years now. And this machine is slightly different in the fact that it's not going to test for alcohol. It's going to test for 5 classifications of drugs. And I'll be honest with you, there's some people right now that condone their way of life. And if you and your families don't know how many people are out there right now operating under the influence of drugs, you probably should. In fact, you may think twice about bringing yourself and your families out there, and this machine is going to help our officers make our roads safer, okay? But what it's not going to do, it's not going to determine if an officer makes an arrest to begin with, okay? The arrest is made on the officer's observations. It's going to be made on what they observed during the road sobriety tests and things like that. This is simply a screening tool for officers to tell the officers if one of 5 suspected drug classifications are being used by this driver that is believed to be impaired, okay? A lot of people are trying to, again, put up a smoke show. They want you to believe that this instrument is going to determine whether innocent people may be arrested. It doesn't determine a level of impairment. It doesn't do that. All it does is show the officer, okay, is your suspicions correct? Okay, the PBT may have been 0, and now we take the test, and yes, it's showing that there's a drug in one of those 5 drug classifications in the driver's system. And so that's the biggest rumor that I want to dispel. If an officer was to give a PBT and the blood alcohol content was 0.07 below the legal limit, but the officer's experience shows that's not the impairment I'm seeing here today. It's much, much worse. The officer may ask them to take this test, okay? And this is, again, it's going to simply tell them which classification of drugs may be in the system, and maybe none. Maybe the person said, I was adjusting my radio, or maybe I'm just tired. And then this actually saves people, right? It says, oh, okay, so it's not consistent with the sobrieties, and they're showing that it's not no PBT, no alcohol, and now, again, no drugs, and you're on your way. So officers have to rely on their experience. And there are officers who have what's called, they're drug recognition experts, but there's not a lot of them. And this will be something that puts in the hands of all officers and will help them do their job more. So people want you to believe that this is something, again, that if they get arrested on, this is not even admissible in court. So the results of this are not admissible in court, but they want, I know many of you probably heard these rumors. They want to, you to get to vote no because they condone their way of life. I mean, we're just trying to make the roadways safer. We're just trying to save some lives and stuff like that. So we have some experts here today that are going to talk to you a little bit more about this test and the second test that happens if you were arrested in it, because I think it's important to mention that, and I think my colleague's going to talk to you a little bit more about that, so I'll turn things over to her. And
Thank you, Representative Begol. Good morning, Chair Schuette and members of the House Rules Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of HB 4391, which is tie-barred and a bipartisan package to Rep. Begol's bill, House Bill 4390. It would amend the Michigan Vehicle Code to allow for oral fluid collection and testing, lay people call it saliva, as a reliable, non-invasive, and efficient tool as it relates to roadside preliminary breath and chemical testing during traffic stops. Impaired driving remains a growing public safety concern in Michigan and nationwide. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, drug and alcohol-related crashes have increased by 14% over the past 5 years. Data from Michigan and the Office of Highway Safety Planning mirrors this trend, with impairment contributing to a significant number of roadside fatalities and serious injuries. And as Rep. Bagul mentioned earlier, according to the MSP data in 2023, there were over 1,000 crashes and 454 deaths resulted from the impaired driving in Michigan. In my opinion, one death is one too many, and 454 is unacceptable. To address this issue, the governor stood up a traffic safety advisory commission that was launched for a statewide initiative with the goal of reducing crashes and saving lives on our roadways. When New York finished their pilot program, there were 200 samples tested, and what I want to point out is that the top 3 most common additional drugs that were detected in oral fluid testing were cocaine, heroin, and morphine. So again, the majority of the tests were showing those 3 substances. As someone with a healthcare background and an advocate for patients, I have witnessed the physical pain and suffering of survivors of auto accidents in my practice for over 20 years. First come the actual and literal difficult and often painful steps after being in a hospital bed, often for many days or weeks, hooked up to many tubes. And then with the help of members of the rehab team, individuals learn daily tasks like bathing, dressing, holding a spoon to feed oneself, and walking. Often upon discharge comes the reality of what they have survived, along with the psychosocial impairments made and the emotional aftermath that them and their families come to face. And then the medical bills pile up. Some have broken bones, some have wounds to their internal organs, and the most challenging to rehab, which sometimes have impairments for life, are brain and spinal cord injuries. The situation I just described is if the individual was lucky enough to survive. You see, many do not. As Rep. Bagul mentioned, the Swift family, Mr. Swift lost both of his parents in a impaired driver crash. Every birthday, anniversary, and holiday are difficult for the families of these victims. And my goal of this legislation, or I should say our goal of this legislation, is to make our roads safer while helping more families enjoy these celebrations together. Additionally, I also wanted to touch on the staff shortages facing our hospitals. Traditionally, if a member of law enforcement observes erratic driving behavior like Rep. Bagul outlined, such as excessive swerving on the roads, they pull the driver over, issue those field sobriety tests, and then if the driver meets criteria, they may need to go to a medical facility to have an expert, either phlebotomist or nurse, do a blood draw. This diverts critical resources and personnel from patient care, especially during peak times and high demand. From my healthcare perspective, I support the use of oral fluid testing because of the growing number of drivers operating under the influence of controlled substances. We need safer roads and fewer incidences of impaired driving that lead to crash injuries and deaths for drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians alike. While a drug's presence alone does not prove impairment, just like the presence of alcohol, law enforcement will not rely on these tests alone. Stops are made only after an officer has observed driving behavior that is suggestive of an impairment. I want to go a step further, following up on what Rep. Bagul talked about with the device. So if that device were to test positive for a drug class, the next step would be an additional oral swab. So a swab would go around the gums and mouth of the person with their consent, and then that would be sent off to a laboratory qualified to do the testing. That testing would test for over 200 specific drugs and then give levels of that drug in someone's system. The Governor's Traffic Safety Advisory Council and Michigan's Office of Highway Safety have reclassified Michigan as a state with higher impaired driving crashes. Since nearly 30% of accidents were a direct result of impaired driving, this truly has become a public health crisis. I would like to note that these bills were also supported by the following groups: Michigan Licensed Beverage Association, Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, AAA Auto, Michigan Sheriff's Association, Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving, Michigan State Police, and the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan. Thank you for your support in this legislation. Additionally, House Bill 4390 and 91 passed unanimously out of the Government Operations Committee on May 22nd. We respectfully urge your support for this public health and safety policy, and we are available for questions, but also know that Kristen Burke is a specialist in this area who is here to testify if you will have her. Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I just want to arm you with a little bit more information, because what we're hearing or seeing is that there's a group of people who are coming around and they're handing out a sheet, and it's just misinformation. And so I want you to be prepared and have the knowledge to question those subjects when they're doing that. So the biggest one is what drug specifically does this machine test for? And that is methamphetamine, amphetamine, heroin, opiates, cocaine, and benzodiazepine, and THC. And the one that people seem to be focusing on the most is the THC, right? Because smoking marijuana here in Michigan is legal. And people are saying, well, innocent people are going to be arrested, when they're driving. And that's simply not true. And here's how you can, dispel that rumor when they say it. So this machine, okay, when you're talking about THC, okay, is looking for the Delta 9 psychoactive ingredient THC that is in marijuana, okay? And it's not going to tell to what level of impairment that person has, but it's going to look for that. And we want accurate information, okay? And you want it as close to the driving as possible. Right now, we have a PBT that'll, tell how much alcohol is in the system. We have then a more reliable test that's given at the jail, okay, or at the hospital if it's blood. But the closer you can, get these results to the driving, the more accurate you're going to know just what was going on at the time of maybe a possible fatal crash or accident and things like that. So it's important to know that Delta 9 psychoactive ingredient I'm talking about, okay, 73% of it is dissipates into your cells within 30 minutes. Within an hour and a half, 90% of it is already gone, okay? So the person that says, well, I'm going to, I smoke marijuana on the weekend, and then I'm going to get stopped, 2 weeks from now, and then I'm going to be arrested. That's not true, okay? It's testing the Delta 9, and your body rids that very quickly. And so it's a very accurate instrument in determining a time frame of what that driver may have been under at the time, like I said, especially when we're talking fatal car crashes, and the families are going to want justice, and the police need to be presenting a picture of what was going on at that time. So I hope that explains and dispels the myth that some innocent person, a week or something like that is going to get arrested just because of this. It's simply not true, okay? And again, it's not admissible in court. It's just going to identify what drug was in that subject's system at the time, okay? Thank you very much for all of your time today.
That was very thorough testimony, and thanks for walking us through every step of that process. I think that was really helpful for the committee to hear. So Representative Rogers, just a question for you here. So this bill comes to rules because it involves the Department of State Police promulgating rules in accordance with the administration of chemical tests. Have you engaged with MSP on what their rulemaking procedure and process might look like?
Yes. So they have, of course, done the they have run the 2 pilot programs and have a body of results from that. And we have engaged with them. They have been supportive of this legislation. And again, I think we mentioned this earlier, but Alabama has made this the standard practice of I almost said care because I'm a healthcare provider, but the standard practice of what kind of fluid they collect on a regular basis. Indiana is looking to do the same. So we do have a body of work from other states, and I think that's what MSP has said they would base their promulgation of rules on.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? Oh, Representative Liberati.
Breathalyzers are admissible in court, correct?
The PBT that is administered on the road by the police officer is not, unless the defendant requests that the analysis be brought into court in their defense.
Okay.
And just to follow up, this would mirror that process. So currently, you would do a breathalyzer, it'd give you an indication of the presence of alcohol. It is not a definitive of how much would be in your system. And so then you would have the blood draw at the lab, and that's the part that would be admissible in court, and that's what oral fluid would follow, that kind of parallel track. So if you did the roadside handheld device test, it gave you a positive or negative. That's all it does, is a kind of a green or red light. Then you would follow this up with the second oral swab that would be sent to the lab that would give you a more specific, and that's the part that would be admissible in court.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right. Thank you, Representative Rogers and Representative Begole. Next, we're going to be hearing from Tim Beck from the Michigan Republican Cannabis Caucus. Mr. Beck, please come forward. Begin when you're ready. Yeah, the red button in front of the mic. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Wetzel. Nice to see you. Hello, Representative Wetzel, you're my state representative, and I admire your work from afar, and it's nice you can hear what I have to say. Now, let me put it this way. I have a quick, clean counterpoint, and I'm going to pass out to all of you. It's a story in M Live recently due to the House Government Operations Committee and what happened there, and I wasn't allowed to testify. They were real busy. But the point is, the Republican Party Cannabis Caucus, exists partially to disabuse the notion that only Democrats smoke marijuana. Okay, I want to be clear about that. Number two, we believe in free markets. We believe in individual liberty as opposed to group rights, and we don't like excessive taxation. So bottom line, this test, I'm telling you right now, I think the only reason that this has come before you now is because of term limits. It's a lack of institutional memory. Because some years back, the Michigan legislature, alarmed by by marijuana, okay, they got concerned it's going to cause drug driving. There was be mayhem and death on the road. So they spent $626,000 to do a study. I have that study here. And the conclusion of that study was that this oral fluid testing and even drug recognition experts were practically useless in terms of being able to deal with this particular problem because it doesn't detect impairment. That's very important. It's not like a PBT. It's not effective that way because, again, marijuana and many of these other drugs, they're tested for. I'm not talking about cocaine and heroin and all that, but you're talking there's legitimate prescription drugs for anxiety and depression that are legal. And again, the Michigan Court of Appeals ruled a few years back that, again, drug recognition experts are not admissible. Their testimony is useless. In fact, they don't even exist anymore. And now this oral fluid testing has resurrected itself, and now it's in play again. And, the thing is, you ask yourself, well, Mr. Representative Begole tried to tell you, well, what happens if, you don't take a PBT or you don't take this drug? Well, I'll tell you what happens and what can happen. About 10 years ago, I was pulled over on the side of the expressway. I was talking on the phone, actually to a reporter because I was a leader in getting marijuana legalized in this state. and this police officer pulled up behind me, gets out of his car, asks what I'm doing. I said, well, sir, I'm just on the phone. He says, I think it's a little more than that. Now, I'm telling you, as God is my witness, I didn't have one drop of alcohol to drink. I was not high or anything like that. He told me, ordered me to do a field sobriety test. I did a field sobriety test, and he said I failed. Yeah, and then he said, demand I take a PBT. I just got a bad vibe from this guy. And he said, no, I'm not going to take no PBT. Okay, well, I'll tell you what happened. Within 3 minutes, I was in handcuffs, and I was in a squad car, and I was taken to the prison or police facility. And then there was a trip to the hospital where they got a warrant to do a blood draw. And, well, you know, unfortunately for me, the blood draw is not an instantaneous result, okay? It has to go to a lab and be tested. So I spent the night in the lockup. And, you know, hey, it wasn't pretty. I heard a lot of sad stories from inmates there about how they've been in there for 3 days because they couldn't afford a lawyer and all that stuff. Well, I could afford a lawyer. You know, I got out the next day. The results came in. Nope. No alcohol, nothing, no drugs, totally clean. And so in any way, when the thing was adjudicated, ultimately I paid a fine, okay, for refusal to take a PBT, and it's part of the so-called plea bargain. Well, they expunged the record, so I have no criminal history, nothing like that. Now, let me tell you something. I fear for folks that don't understand the system. I fear for people that don't have, what's that expression, enough FU money, okay, to defend themselves and defend their rights. It's going to be tough. This is a tool of oppression. It's voodoo science. It's junk science.
Mr. Beck,
That's all
we're
I
at
have
5
to say.
minutes, so I appreciate your
All right,
testimony.
fine. And
Thank
if
you.
I could, if I urge you, if you could read one thing among all this material, take a look at this M Live story.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beck. Appreciate your
Yep.
testimony. All right. Next, we'll be hearing from Kristen Burke from the Regional Toxicology Liaison. Yeah, I think that goes on top of the microphone. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Schutte and the members of the House Rules Committee for the opportunity to testify today on House Bill 4391. My name is Kristen Burke, and I have retired as the Director of California Department of Justice Forensic Toxicology Laboratory in 2022. I have over 27 years in forensic toxicology of experience. Today I'm testifying to provide scientific information on the utility of collecting oral fluid at the roadside for evidentiary and non-evidentiary drug testing. Evidentiary samples can be collected for laboratory analysis, while non-evidentiary roadside oral fluid devices may be used by law enforcement officers to screen for drugs in drivers. While oral fluid testing for impaired driving enforcement has been successfully implemented in numerous countries, the United States has conducted extensive evaluation studies over the past decade, comparing roadside oral fluid devices with traditional blood sampling methods, consistently demonstrating the technology's value and operational efficiency. The technology allows police officers to collect oral fluid samples from a driver. The collected sample is then tested using a handheld device that can quickly screen for recent drug use, providing supplementary information to support officers' articulation of observed behavioral indicators when formulating reasonable suspicion or probable cause determinations. The technology behind these devices utilizes lateral flow immunoassay technology. This is a method that has been established by the scientific community for decades. The handheld device analyzes collected oral fluid samples, looking for the presence of drugs that can indicate recent use, which could affect a person's driving ability. The key advantage is the speed officers get. They're able to receive the results in minutes at the roadside rather than waiting hours or days for comprehensive testing, which can be done in oral fluid collection and or blood results from the laboratory. This is especially important for detecting cannabis or marijuana use because THC, which is the active component in marijuana, the psychoactive component, it doesn't stay in the blood for very long. THC naturally moves quickly from the blood into the tissues. So if there's a delay in collection of the blood sample, the THC levels in blood may decrease significantly, making it challenging to detect recent use. Like any screening technology, these devices may sometimes produce false positive or false negative results. Some apparent false positive results may occur due to the differences in the collection time of the oral fluid screening results and the blood samples. This is particularly relevant with THC because of its lipophilic properties, meaning it likes fat over the water. The THC quickly moves from the blood, which is predominantly water, into tissues, which is predominantly fat. If there's a delay in the collecting the blood sample, the THC levels in blood may decrease significantly while remaining detectable in the oral fluid hours earlier. This can make it appear as though the oral fluid test was a false positive, when both tests may be accurate for their respective collection times. Some drugs present different detection challenges. For example, benzodiazepines, such as the anti-anxiolytic drugs, medications, are more difficult to collect in oral fluid. They're more difficult to detect in oral fluid than blood. In contrast, so what can happen as a result of that is you may see a negative result in the oral fluid and positive in the blood because of that. The THC detection works well in oral fluid as it identifies the parent compound that can indicate recent use. These roadside devices are screening tools used as part of the totality of information officers gather during the impaired driving investigations. They can be used along with observable signs of impairment, field sobriety test results, the driver's behavior, and other evidence at the scene. The oral fluid test provides additional supporting information to help officers articulate reasonable suspicion or probable cause for drug-impaired driving. For evidentiary purposes, oral fluid samples can be sent to the forensic toxicology laboratories for comprehensive testing. The extensive testing typically involves screening for a broad list of drugs, followed by confirming the presence of specific drugs. For example, if you detect benzodiazepines as the class, it goes to the laboratory and they'll identify specifically which benzodiazepine they found, such as alprazolam, which is Xanax, for example. This can be applied both with evidentiary oral fluid samples and blood samples. This is the same approach typically used for alcohol, where there's a preliminary screening result that is obtained in the field, either by an evidentiary breath test or blood sample, and then an evidentiary blood test and blood sample analyzed in the lab.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. You asked for 5 minutes, and we're coming to the end here. So,
Okay.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just wrapping it up. Yeah, thank you.
Wrap it up really quick?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. So the scope of the testing is going to vary from lab to lab, just mentioning that. And then there's states that currently use it, such as Alabama and New York. And there's multiple projects that have been conducted. Each drug-impaired driving incident represents a potential traffic death. These oral fluid devices provide law enforcement with valuable evidence of recent drug use that may correlate with the observed impairment making the critical tools to assist the detection and deterrence of this dangerous crime. Similar to preliminary alcohol tests, roadside oral fluid testing devices are not intended to replace forensic toxicology laboratory analysis, but rather provide law enforcement with immediate screening capabilities to support their investigation. I'm available questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Any questions, members of the committee? Appreciate it. Thank you very much for your testimony. I have some additional cards to read in here. Not wishing to speak, neutral on the bill is Noah Smith, representing the Criminal Defense Attorneys of Michigan. Not wishing to speak in opposition of the bill is Gabrielle Dressner from the ACLU of Michigan. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Brett Visner from Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Matt Saxton from the Michigan Sheriff's Association. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Alex Ott from Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Darren Gondel from the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Matt Breslin from the American Property Casualty Insurance, representing the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Scott Ellis from the Michigan Licensed Beverage Association. And not wishing to speak in support of the bill is Craig Ryan from AAA Auto Club Group. All right. There being no further business before the committee, we have no absent members, perfect attendance, so the committee will stand adjourned.